Hi, my name is Alex and welcome to my reflective video. For this model, we had to decide which dinosaur we would like to create from scratch, start to finish. I decided to create Parasaurolophus. The reason for that mainly is because I found this dinosaur very interesting and different, so I thought it would be interesting to model it. First, I gathered numerous reference images from the internet to have a better idea how the dinosaur looks and what color schemes I could maybe paint it later on. I found an image of the skeleton of the dinosaur and outlined it in Photoshop to have a silhouette of the dinosaur, that which then I could use for a modeling reference in the 3ds Max. I filled that outline dinosaur with various colors, mostly based on already existing lizards that I found on the internet. I tried to not stick to a plain brown or grayish lizards. I tried to pick out the very colorful ones like yellows and turquoise to make the dinosaur a bit more interesting. So I experimented with the colors and created a few different designs. It was difficult to decide which design I would go for in the end, as everyone I asked and the feedback I received seemed to pick a different one. Everyone liked something on different concepts, so my decision wasn't set in stone until the actual texturing stage. To create the model, I used a workflow by Mashumishu, who's starting off with base mesh, and going to sculpt and detailing, then retopology, and texturing. As I mentioned before, I created an outline of the dinosaur to be a reference to model the creature in 3ds Max. However, I only managed to create the side view, as it was really hard to find a front view of the dinosaur and the exact proportions. So it caused me some problems later on, as the dinosaur ended up being much wider than it's supposed to be, but for the base mesh it was still okay. So the base mesh was created in 3ds Max using a box modeling technique to quickly block out all the big shapes. After posting my work on forums, I gathered some feedback and people were saying that I was missing some loops around the ankles and the feet, and also that stomach area was a bit flat on the sides. Those changes were made before moving on to the sculpt. I started out by blocking out muscles in the mesh. Firstly, it wasn't going very well. I didn't have a lot of reference of muscles, so it was hard to determine how the muscles were flowing on a dinosaur. After talking to Mike Woods, it was suggested to look at animal anatomy images for reference, and I also found a picture of the muscles of that particular dinosaur that I was working on. Therefore, the muscle diagram that I found and the animal anatomy books were very helpful to sculpt the muscles. It was suggested to narrow the body as the mesh didn't look very realistic and it was very chunky at the back. This was a result of having only the side view as a reference and creating the base mesh like I mentioned before. But this could easily be fixed in ZBrush as I did later on. Then I moved to refining the crest and making the indent going in the middle, the nostrils, and also the mouth. When all the muscles were in place and the shape looked right, I moved on to creating more details for the dinosaur. I created the scales with masking. I masked the areas where I wanted the scales to be, and then inverting the masking, I managed to bring the scales out of the body using clay tubes and standard brush and smoothing. Wrinkles were created by standard brush with a gravity setting on. I created skin cracks by standard brush with an alpha on it, using drag rectangle and a combination of freehand stroke. Later on, I received a feedback to add more varied wrinkles to the face, as well as more scales around the body. The mouth was also not wrinkly enough, which I also changed straight away. I also redefined the jaw, as I found on some reference images the jaw was more pronounced for the dinosaur and I thought it looked more interesting. I also got the feedback that the actual mouth was a bit too straight compared to all the references I used. However, it was very close to the first hand and I didn't manage to change that in the end. I posed the sculpted dinosaur using Transposed Tool in ZBrush and then rendered the turntable there. One thing that I could have improved was making the base mesh more dense, as in ZBrush I only could have divided maximum 7 times, but because the base mesh was quite low poly already, while it was dividing, it still wasn't creating enough resolution for me to sculpt perfectly all the details. Therefore, when zoomed in, it shows a bit of pixelation up close, which isn't very convenient. It also affected the polypaint later on. For the retop, I exported the sculpt from ZBrush to 3ds Max and used Step Build and Extend tools to create the low poly. I used various topology references to determine how the mesh should flow together and animate properly. Final try count was around 9,000, therefore there was still some tries left. I was considering adding a fin, that some references were showing that the Parasaurolophus actually had, going from the crest across the back. In the end, I didn't add it, however, because of time constraints. At the end, it was also suggested to me to add more skin folds, but unfortunately didn't have enough time. Most people that I showed my concepts to chosen the reddish and skin color combination, which then was chosen as a diffuse for the dinosaur. I started creating the diffuse by polypainting the colors in ZBrush. Used cavity masking to get the wrinkles be a bit darker. Used color spray together with dotted alpha to blend the colors together as well. I also used cavity masking to get the dark color in between the scales on top and the feet. Normal map and diffuse were projected using XNormal. If I tried to use 3ds Max to project the normal map, it might have caused some problems when importing the highest subdivision level of the scope from ZBrush. It could make 3ds Max lag or not even working, or the mesh wouldn't even import at all. XNormal allowed me to import the highest subdivision level, and therefore getting the most amount of detail that I could on a normal map. Specular and Gloss Map was created in Photoshop. Pedro Toledo's website helped me to get more information on how these maps should look. Eye textures were not projected, but created just in Photoshop from scratch. Endo was used to create its normal map. Catterick was used to create the animations for the dinosaur. This skeleton was created from scratch based on the mesh. Slides from the lectures were used as a reference in making sure no mistakes were made. The dinosaur was skinned mostly using paint weights. After animating, some areas like the joints on the legs had to be adjusted and fixed. Instead of stretching the bones from the spine to the belly, a muscle could have been used instead, and that would create a more realistic look and animation. To start off with, one of the 4-legged presets found on the Autodesk website was used as a base. Adjustment to the swing of the body, as well as the neck and the head, had to be made. The tail also had to be adjusted, as it had to be more stiff. On top of that, an adjustment layer was created to fix the back legs from twitching left and right. Unfortunately, that problem still occurs if the hips are lowered a little bit too much. The idle animation used only one layer and was animated by hand using AutoKey. There are still some problems with the animation. The back legs are too stiff and the toes don't bend enough. This was not fixed due to the bones twitching left and right when the feet were close to the body. Therefore, I wasn't able to lift the leg high enough for it to make it look very realistic. In the ideal animation, when the dinosaur moves up, it is quite stiff and it could have been softened a bit to make it look more realistic. Animations then were exported to UDK and blended together. What could have been improved there was the speed of the walk in the script. Animations from 3ds Max, Materials, and Mesh were all exported to UDK. Using materials created, textures were set up appropriately. Physic asset was also created for the mesh. Properties like twist angle and mass scale were used to create a little bit more realistic fall when the dinosaur dies. AnimSet and AnimTree were created to blend the animations together. Week 8 slides were a great help to setting up the scripts for the UDK game. This allowed to have the dinosaur as a playable character or a pawn. At the beginning, there were no problems with compiling the script. However, when UDK opened, the dinosaur didn't want to move. It was standing in one place and didn't play the walk animation. It was also facing completely the other way, and it was hovering above the ground. These problems, however, were fixed by changing the position of the mesh, rebuilding the paths, and changing the origin rotation to 90. The scale in the script was also changed to 1, as to keep the actual size, and make the dinosaur look realistic when walked up to close. Actor Factory was set up for the dinosaur in Kisbet. For the turntable, the matinee was set up, and the mesh was lit up with 4 lights. Unfortunately, due to the time constraints, I wasn't able to set up the gray background, therefore it's showing on black. These renders were made of a static mesh, posed previously in 3ds Max.